In 1590, a man stood on the shores of Roanoke Island, staring at something impossible. His name was John White. He was a governor, an artist, a father. And 3 years earlier, he had left over 100 people on this island, men, women, children. His own daughter. His infant granddaughter. Now, as he walked through the settlement, his footsteps echoed in silence. The houses were empty. Not destroyed. Not burned. Just, empty. No bodies lay in the streets. No graves marked the earth. No signs of struggle or violence anywhere. Only structures carefully dismantled. Only silence. And then he saw it. Carved into a wooden post at the entrance of the fort, one word. Croatoan. An entire colony had vanished without a trace. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? To understand what was lost, we must first understand what was promised. England in the late 1500s was a nation hungry for expansion. Spain controlled vast territories in the Americas. France had claimed regions to the north. England needed its own foothold in the New World, not just for wealth, but for survival in a rapidly changing global order. Sir Walter Raleigh, a favorite of Queen Elizabeth I, saw opportunity where others saw wilderness. He envisioned a New England across the Atlantic. A place where English families could build lives, where resources could flow back to the crown, where Protestant values could take root far from Catholic threats. But dreams of empire are always expensive. The first attempt came in 1585. A military expedition. Soldiers, not settlers. They landed on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what is now North Carolina. The mission was reconnaissance, establishing contact with native peoples, mapping the coastline. It failed within a year. Supplies ran low. Relations with the local Secotnan and Croatoan tribes deteriorated. When Sir Francis Drake stopped by in 1586, the desperate men abandoned the colony and sailed back to England. Raleigh was undeterred. He had invested too much. The Queen had granted him rights to any land he could claim. This wasn't just about one island. This was about England's future. So in 1587, he tried again. But this time, he changed the strategy entirely. This time, he sent families. On May 8, 1587, a fleet departed from Plymouth, England. On board were 117 colonists. Not soldiers this time. Families. Men, women, 17 children. They were promised land, opportunity, a new beginning in a new world. Leading them was John White, an artist and cartographer who had been to Roanoke before. He knew the dangers. He knew the fragility of colonial life in hostile territory. But he also believed it could work. The plan was to settle not on Roanoke Island itself, but further north in the Chesapeake Bay area, where relations with native peoples might be less complicated. But the ship's captain, Simon Fernandez, had other priorities. He refused to take them further north. He wanted to return to privateering. Raiding Spanish ships was far more profitable than babysitting colonists. So the families were left on Roanoke Island. The same place where the previous colony had failed. They arrived in late July. What they found was unsettling. The fort from 1585 was still standing, but overgrown. One skeleton lay inside, a man from the previous expedition, killed by natives. The houses were decaying. The land felt used, abandoned, haunted. But they had no choice. They began to rebuild. To plant crops. To make contact with the Croatoan people, who had been friendly during the previous expedition. The colonists hoped for trade, for knowledge, for survival. Then, just weeks after arrival, a colonist named George Howe was killed. He had wandered alone to catch crabs in shallow water. Native warriors attacked him. 16 wounds. A clear message. The English retaliated. They raided a nearby village. But they attacked the wrong tribe, killing people who had nothing to do with Howe's death. Any hope of peaceful coexistence began to crumble. By late August, the situation was dire. Supplies were running low. Winter was approaching. The colonists needed help from England, more food, more tools, more people. The council made a decision. Someone had to return to England to bring back reinforcements. That someone was John White. He didn't want to go. His daughter Eleanor had just given birth to a baby girl, Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the Americas. How could he leave them? But the colonists insisted. He was their leader. He had connections in England. He was the only one who could convince investors to send more support. So he made a promise. He would return quickly. A few months at most. He told the colonists, if you have to leave the island for any reason, carve the name of your destination into a tree. If you are in danger, carve a cross above the name. Then he sailed away, leaving 115 people behind. He promised to come back soon. He wouldn't. John White reached England in November 1587. He immediately began organizing a relief mission. Supplies were gathered. Ships were prepared. He planned to return by spring 1588. But history had other plans. In 1588, the Spanish Armada launched its invasion of England. 130 warships sailed toward the English coast, intending to overthrow Queen Elizabeth and restore Catholic rule. Every available English ship was commandeered for defense. Every sailor, every resource, every vessel was needed for survival. John White's return voyage was cancelled. The colonists were alone. The war dragged on. Even after England's victory over the Armada, the conflict continued. Spanish ships still prowled the Atlantic. Travel to the Americas was impossibly dangerous. White tried to leave in 1588. His small fleet was attacked by French ships and forced back to port. He tried again in 1589. Investors pulled out at the last minute. Months became years. On Roanoke Island, seasons changed. Crops were planted and harvested. Or perhaps they failed. Perhaps the colonists rationed food through brutal winters. Perhaps they made peace with neighboring tribes. Or perhaps they were hunted. No one in England knew. There were no letters. No ships returned with news. No merchant vessels reported sightings. For 3 years, the lost colony existed in absolute silence. And in that silence, anything could have happened. Finally, in August 1590, John White returned to Roanoke. The journey had taken 3 years. 3 years of bureaucracy, failed expeditions, and sleepless nights wondering if his family was still alive. But now, as his ship anchored off the coast, he allowed himself a moment of hope. Perhaps they had survived. Perhaps his daughter and granddaughter were waiting. The first sign came before he even reached shore. Smoke rose from the island. A signal. A campfire. Evidence of life. White's crew rowed toward the beach. As they approached, they shouted, played trumpets, tried to make their presence known. If the colonists were hiding, they needed to know friends had arrived. No one answered. They landed at dusk. The beach was empty. They lit torches and walked toward the settlement as darkness fell. What they found defied explanation. The houses were gone. Not destroyed. Not burned down. Dismantled. The wooden structures had been carefully taken apart, as if the colonists had systematically deconstructed their own homes. The fort was still standing, but reinforced. Someone had strengthened the palisade walls, added new defenses. This was the work of people preparing for something, or hiding from something. But there were no people. No bodies in the dirt. No bones scattered by animals. No graves marked with crosses or stones. Nothing to indicate mass death or violence. White searched desperately. He looked through every corner of the fort. He examined the ground for signs of struggle. He called out names into the darkness. Silence. Then he saw it. On a post at the entrance to the fort, carved cleanly into the wood. CRO. Just 3 letters. Unfinished or deliberately abbreviated, no one could say. And on a nearby tree, carved more carefully, the full word. Croatoan. No cross above it. No symbol of distress. Just the name of an island. And a people. White knew what it meant. Before he left, he had told the colonists to carve their destination if they relocated. Croatoan was an island 50 miles south. The Croatoan people had been friendly. Had the colonists gone there? White wanted to search immediately. But a storm was approaching. His crew refused to risk the journey. They had delivered him to Roanoke. That was enough. The ship sailed away. John White never returned to America. He never saw his daughter again. Never held his granddaughter. Never learned what happened to the 115 people he had left behind. An entire colony had vanished. And all that remained was a name. To understand the mystery, we must understand the word. Croatoan was not a random name. It was not a cry for help or a cryptic message. It was a place, and a people. The Croatoan tribe inhabited Hatteras Island, about 50 miles south of Roanoke. Unlike many other tribes in the region, they had maintained friendly relations with the English. During the 1584 expedition, a Croatoan man named Manteo had even traveled to England, learned the language, and returned as a liaison between his people and the colonists. When John White's colony arrived in 1587, Manteo was baptized as a Christian and made a lord of Roanoke. He was trusted. Respected. A bridge between 2 worlds. If the colonists had to flee Roanoke, Croatoan would have been the logical destination. But here's what makes the mystery deeper. White had specifically instructed the colonists, if you leave, carve your destination. If you're in danger, carve a cross above it. There was no cross. This suggests the colonists left willingly. Planned their departure. Took their belongings, dismantled their homes, and relocated to Croatoan Island with the intention of being found there. So why did no one ever find them? White tried to search Croatoan, but storms prevented him. Other expeditions were planned but never carried out. England's attention shifted to other colonial ventures, Jamestown, further north, founded in 1607. And yet, there were whispers. In the years following the disappearance, English explorers reported strange things. Native tribes in the region spoke of people with light skin living among them. Some tribes had members with European features, lighter eyes, different hair textures. In 1607, when Jamestown was established, Captain John Smith heard stories of survivors. He sent search parties. They found nothing conclusive. But the stories persisted. Children who looked English. Tribes who used English words. Remnants of European tools in native villages. Had the colonists been absorbed into the Croatoan people? Or had something else happened entirely? Over 4 centuries, historians, archaeologists, and amateur detectives have proposed countless theories about what happened to the lost colony. Some are supported by evidence. Others are pure speculation. But every single theory leaves something unexplained. Let's examine the most compelling possibilities. Theory 1, assimilation with the Croatoan. This is the most widely accepted theory. The colonists, struggling to survive, relocated to Croatoan Island and gradually integrated with the native population. Intermarriage occurred. European genes mixed with indigenous lineages. Over generations, the colonists' descendants became indistinguishable from the Croatoan people. Evidence supporting this theory is intriguing. In the early 1700s, explorer John Lawson encountered the Hatteras tribe, descendants of the Croatoan, and noted that some members had gray eyes, a rarity among native populations. They also claimed descent from English ancestors who could talk in a book, meaning they could read. Genetic studies in the 20th and 21st centuries have found European DNA markers in communities descended from tribes in the Roanoke region. Archaeological digs on Hatteras Island have uncovered European artifacts, a sword hilt, gun parts, copper fragments, dated to the late 1500s. But here's the problem. If 115 people joined the Croatoan, where is the overwhelming archaeological evidence? Where are the graves with English belongings? Where are the structures, the tools, the undeniable proof of such a large influx of Europeans? The evidence exists, but it's scattered. Fragmented. Not enough to definitively close the case. Theory 2, Massacre. Perhaps the colonists never made it to Croatoan. Perhaps they tried to leave Roanoke but were intercepted by hostile tribes. The Secondman, the Powhatan, other groups who had reasons to view the English as threats. Perhaps the colonists were killed, not in a single battle, but in a series of ambushes during their journey south. This would explain the absence of bodies on Roanoke itself. They weren't killed on the island. They were killed in the forests, on the beaches, along the coastline. Their bones scattered, reclaimed by nature. Oral traditions among some native tribes reference conflicts with Europeans during this period. Some stories speak of small groups of white settlers being attacked and wiped out. But once again, there's a problem. Where are the remains? Massacres leave evidence. Bone fragments, weapons, burial sites. 400 years is a long time, but archaeology has recovered far older sites with far less promising conditions. No mass grave has ever been found. No battlefield. No definitive proof of widespread violence. Theory 3, the Dare Stones Deception. In the 1930s, a series of stones were discovered along the eastern United States, allegedly carved by Eleanor Dare, John White's daughter. The stones told a dramatic story. The colonists had fled Roanoke, traveled inland, were attacked by natives, suffered disease and starvation. Eleanor's husband and daughter supposedly died. The stones chronicled years of horror before Eleanor herself perished. The first stone seemed genuine. Experts examined it. It could have been authentic. But then more stones appeared. Dozens of them. Each discovered by people hoping for reward money. The stories became increasingly elaborate, the carvings suspiciously convenient. Eventually, investigators concluded the stones were hoaxes. Fabrications created to profit from the mystery. But the first stone? Some still debate its authenticity. Did Eleanor Dare carve a message into stone before she died? Or was even that first discovery part of an elaborate fraud? We may never know. Theory 4, Migration to the interior. Some researchers believe the colonists didn't go to Croatoan at all. They went inland. Archaeological evidence from a site 50 miles west of Roanoke, near the Albemarle Sound, has revealed European artifacts dated to the late 1500s. Pieces of iron, borderware pottery typical of English households. These items were found in native contexts, suggesting trade or integration. Another site, even further inland, has produced similar findings. Perhaps Croatoan wasn't a destination. Perhaps it was a message: we went with the Croatoan people, but not to their island. They're guiding us somewhere safer. This theory suggests the colonists, with Mantio's help, relocated to inland native settlements where they would be protected from Spanish raids, isolated from European diseases, and able to start over. Over time, their English identity faded. Their children grew up speaking native languages, adopting native customs. Within 2 generations, they were no longer English. They were something new. Theory 5, something we'll never know. And then there's the most unsettling possibility. Perhaps the truth is so strange, so unexpected, that we will never piece it together. Perhaps the colonists made a decision that historians, with all their assumptions about colonial behavior, can't fathom. Perhaps they were taken somewhere unexpected. Perhaps they chose to disappear. Or perhaps the answer is simpler than we think, lost to time because no one bothered to write it down. Every theory explains part of the mystery. None explain everything. This is the question that haunts every investigator. Where are the dead? Even if the colonists successfully relocated to Croatoan, not everyone would have survived the journey. The elderly. The sick. Infants. People die during migrations. Bodies are left behind or buried along the way. Even if they were massacred, bones remain. Skulls. Fragments. Even if they integrated with native tribes, surely some died in the early years and were buried with English belongings, grave markers, something identifiable. But Roanoke offers nothing. Hurricanes have been suggested as an explanation. Perhaps the entire colony was wiped out by a storm, bodies swept into the ocean. But hurricanes don't dismantle houses carefully. They destroy. Disease is another possibility. Perhaps an epidemic killed everyone so quickly that survivors had no time to bury the dead properly. But diseases don't make bodies vanish. The absence of human remains is the single most baffling aspect of the lost colony. It's as if the colonists knew they were leaving, and left nothing behind to prove they were ever there. Almost as if they wanted to disappear. The mystery refuses to die. In recent decades, new technologies have allowed researchers to search for the lost colony in ways John White never could. Ground-penetrating radar has been used to scan Roanoke Island for hidden graves. Results have been inconclusive. DNA analysis has been conducted on descendants of native tribes in the region. Some show European ancestry consistent with late 16th century contact. But definitive proof linking them to the Roanoke colonists remains elusive. In 2012, researchers at the British Museum examined a map created by John White. Using advanced imaging, they discovered hidden markings, faint symbols indicating 2 locations away from Roanoke where White may have believed the colonists relocated. Excavations at those sites have revealed tantalizing artifacts. European pottery. Iron tools. Evidence of English presence. But nothing definitive. No inscription saying, "We were the Roanoke colonists." No grave marked with Eleanor Dare's name. In 2020, archaeologists announced they had found what might be part of a colonist's rapier sword at a site on Hatteras Island. The metal was European. The dating was consistent. One artifact. After 400 years of searching, the lost colony of Roanoke has become more than history. It's America's first great mystery. A story that refuses resolution. A reminder that even in the age of records and documents, people can simply vanish. For centuries, Roanoke has inspired fear, fascination, and speculation. The idea of an entire community disappearing without explanation taps into primal anxieties about the unknown. About what waits in the wilderness. About how fragile civilization really is. The lost colony also raises uncomfortable questions about early American history. If the colonists did integrate with native tribes, their disappearance wasn't a tragedy, it was assimilation. It was survival through adaptation. It challenges the narrative of European colonization as conquest and suggests something more complex. Something overlooked. But if they were killed, it's a reminder that colonization was never peaceful. That English settlers were not welcomed with open arms. That the land was already claimed, already defended. And if they simply left, chose to abandon English identity and live as something else entirely, then perhaps they were the first Americans to reject the colonial project altogether. America's first colony didn't fail. It disappeared. And perhaps that says more about the New World than any successful settlement ever could. Over 400 years later, we still don't know what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. We have theories. We have fragments of evidence. We have oral histories and genetic traces and scattered artifacts. But we don't have the truth. John White died in 1593, 3 years after his final voyage to Roanoke. He never learned what became of his daughter or granddaughter. He never found closure. Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America, would have been 4 years old when her grandfather returned to find nothing. Did she grow up speaking English or Croatoan? Did she remember the settlement, or did it fade into childhood myth? Did she live a long life on Hatteras Island, or die young in the chaos of those early years? We'll never know. All that survived was one word. Croatoan. Carved into wood. Carved into memory. Carved into American history. And sometimes, what history doesn't explain is what haunts us the most. What do you think happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Did they survive by joining the Croatoan people? Were they erased by violence and time? Or did they choose to disappear, to become something other than English, something new? The mystery remains open. And maybe that's exactly as it should be,